X-Men Evolution took some of our favorite mutants from the Marvel Universe and sent them all the way back to high school, and just like with any good TV show set in high school, that means we're going to have a lot of romantic drama and a lot of romance subplots. And this is actually something that I think X-Men Evolution handled very well throughout a majority of the show. We had relationships like Scott and Jean, which in my opinion genuinely set the standard for what that relationship should look like, as well as highlighting some other relationships like the one between Amanda and Kurt that I thought was really sweet. Even got hints of potentially there being a Rogue and Gambit relationship as we got into the later seasons of this show. There was one relationship that I feel never got the time and attention that it could have used, and that was the relationship between Kitty and Lance. It's something that we saw build up throughout seasons 1 and 2 of X-Men Evolution, and then it went absolutely nowhere after. But before we get into talking about Kitty and Lance's romance, I'd just like to ask that if you're enjoying the video so far, leave a like and of course subscribe if you want to see more X-Men Evolution content from me in the future. Now on to the wasted romance of Kitty and Lance. Introduced to both of the characters during Kitty's introduction episode back in season 1. Kitty has just discovered her powers as they have started manifesting with her being in high school, and it's causing her to have crazy dreams and to be upset and to feel like an outcast at school. I mean, she already felt like an outcast as she is primarily bullied by a group of mean girls throughout the majority of this first episode at her old high school, and it doesn't help the fact that she also feels othered due to her mutant abilities. And that's when we're introduced to Lance, who is your typical bad boy, doesn't really do anything that he's supposed to, but he's absolutely fascinated with the fact that he's found another mutant, somebody that has powers like him, as he has recently manifested his own. But unlike Kitty, who is afraid of her powers, he sees his powers as his ultimate ticket to being on top of other people. To him, it's a lottery ticket to make life far easier. He can do what he wants, go where he wants. Nobody can stop him because he's so powerful, as throughout the episode we've come to see he's a bully in his own right.
You riding me, Griff? Huh? Are ya? Sorry, man.
But the episode does go out of its way to show that he's not all bad. He genuinely has this connection to Kitty being the only two mutants at his school. He's one of the few people that can actually understand what she's going through and offers himself as a lifeline to her. He's pretty distressed throughout this episode, as I imagine anyone would be discovering mutant powers, especially because her meeting with the X-Men didn't go great. I mean, after track practice, she was introduced to Jean, who told her she was reading her mind, and that's pretty freaky. So to have somebody that's more of a peer and on her level, and someone she might have even seen in the hallways at school relating to her, is pretty important. I do think some of what Lance was saying is genuine. I also can't believe that a majority of what he's giving her is truly meant to forge a connection and is more aptly being used as a way to manipulate Kitty, because as we were shown earlier in the episode, Lance is far more interested in Kitty's abilities as a ticket to getting better grades than he is anything else. He clearly takes advantage of Kitty's trusting nature and takes advantage of the fact that he is the only person that's there to connect with her during this tumultuous time in her life. He is very much taking advantage of her to get her to phase into the place where the faculty keep the computer to change the grades so that he can change his grade to be a better one. He takes advantage of that trust. He obfuscates what he wants to actually do in the administration building by just telling Kitty, oh, this is a way for us to use our powers to help me teach you. And when he does finally reveal his plan, Kitty's not on board with it at all. And when Kitty tries to stop him from doing this, Lance goes full mask off, and back to what we've been seeing throughout the rest of the episode with his interactions with everybody else. Lance, like any proper dark romance, has a lot of anger issues and temper problems, and is often very prone to physically grabbing Kitty, which kind of irks me personally, because I was always very much a you don't touch people, and if they're trying to walk away, you just let them. So for me, it always kind of bothered me when I'd see him grab Kitty, especially if she was trying to walk away during several scenes in this episode and a few others later. It also doesn't help that he's trying to use isolation tactics, which are abuse tactics for the record. It just doesn't help his case.
Piece of advice, Red. I'm the only friend that girl's gonna need, and I'll be teaching her what's what, so you just back yourself off.
And his first resort is also violence the very next second that he sees Kitty's parents, and when they're actively trying to get him away, He is dragging Kitty with him, trying to take her away from everybody that's not him. Also, due to his abject lack of control over his powers, he almost brings the entire building down on Kitty and her parents. And if it wasn't for the fact that Kitty has phasing as a power, he literally would have just killed her right there. So as far as setups go, this is the perfect enemies to lovers trope, guys. But in all seriousness, I wasn't the most thrilled with this being the setup to their relationship. Just for me personally, with how hands-on he was with Kitty, just felt a little weird. They also give me like no reason to give Lance the benefit of the doubt on any of this. Not with how genuine he was being to Kitty when explaining what it feels like to be an outcast, to feel like you don't know what's going on with your body when being a mutant. But on the other hand, I'm pretty sure they had intended for it to play out as being straightforward and that he wasn't really lying to her, but that's how he felt. He just had ulterior motives. And while Kitty would go on to join the X-Men in the first season, Lance would go on to join the Brotherhood. And as far as their romance goes in this first season, that's kind of where it ends. The two of them aren't friends, but they're not necessarily enemies despite playing for the opposite teams. It's actually in the second season that we see a lot of their romance ramp up, especially with the absence of Mystique in the Brotherhood's household now. And they're more apt to kind of do their own thing, which in this case involves Lance finally deciding to try to pursue a romance with Kitty. Well, it's not exactly off to a great start. The same amount of red flags rear their ugly heads, much like they did in that first season, straight up here in the second during the very beginning of these two's relationship. And it also doesn't help that like the first episode of the entire second season revolves around Lance leading the Brotherhood to assault his high school to force reveal that not only they're mutants, but the fact that the X-Men also go to the high school and that they're mutants too. And if it wasn't for the intervention of Professor X violating everybody's mind there and erasing their memory of the entire event, which Professor X needs his own video to talk about his ethical dilemmas, then the X-Men would have had their identities exposed. That doesn't mean that it's all bad for the two of them. As a matter of fact, the second season goes out of its way to give us a lot of scenes between Kitty and Lance that are fairly normal high school relationship shit, where you're kind of dancing around the fact that you like each other while having late night phone calls, wanting to go to dances with one another, constantly being seen together, etc., etc. And it all comes to a head when Lance makes the decision that he's done with the Brotherhood. He does want to have this relationship with Kitty, but the one thing that is constantly being a barrier to him actually being with her is the fact that he plays for the opposite team. And knowing that Kitty is not going to be willing to switch sides, ultimately he decides to attempt to join the X-Men, because what he actively wants is to be closer to Kitty. He wants to genuinely have a reason to be with her, and he realizes he has to be a better man if he's going to get the chance to be with somebody like Kitty, who has been shown to be kind, compassionate, sweet, is full of all of these great qualities that you'd want in a partner. So he's actively trying to better himself. And that's very obvious to everybody involved. He's not necessarily doing this for the right reasons. Some people might consider them the right reasons, but he's at least trying to be better. I guess righteous reasons would be better, but you know what, whatever. You get my point, right?
Professor, I think this is a mistake. I know Lance. He wouldn't do this unless he wanted something.
Yes, I agree. What he wants is to be near Kitty.
But
I believe he's genuine about his feelings for her, and maybe that's a good beginning. Now, let's give him a chance.
Lance does actually try his very best to integrate well with the X-Men and to be a true team player. For example, he was put in a class with a bunch of majorly freshmen in high school who are just new to getting their powers and just new to joining the Xavier Institute. And he doesn't make a fuss about it at all. He takes it all very well and is actively trying to integrate himself with the team. And for somebody of his personality type, like that's a big step that he is taking to try and be better for Kitty. But it isn't really helped by the fact that nobody wants him there except for the professor, Kitty, and I think the younger students that he is meeting. A majority of the cast that we've come to love, being that first generation of mutants we've gotten to know in the first season, oftentimes is bumping heads with Lance, and it's not like he's looking to bump heads with them. Rather, they're shown to be the bullies. Scott is actively bullying Lance and on occasion attempting to get the dude hurt, which is kind of messed up during a training exercise, and I get it. Lance has always been a dick, so now that you have the opportunity to be a dick back to him, you're doing it. But at the same time, this is a guy that is actively trying to make a betterment of himself, trying to make a change in his life, and while he is surely not perfect at it, he's at least genuinely making an effort. For example, he goes out of his way to save Kitty correctly, but doesn't save who is actually supposed to in Rogue. So again, he's there for his own reasons, not necessarily to be the best X-Men. It also doesn't help that his Brotherhood compatriots that he left are not taking it very well that he left. They're calling him a loser for hanging out with the losers. The Brotherhood very much views the X-Men as kind of like these spoiled brats who have it easy in the world of being mutants, and they have it easy because they follow these rules that restrict them. And I think there really is a point to the argument that they're trying to make about privilege and the lack of it and how it affects the entirety of being a mutant, but that's a topic for another video. It's a Brotherhood based on struggle and strife, so to see him go the easier route, they're picking on him for it. And that makes it hard for Lance to continue to try and be an X-Man, that peer pressure.
You're making a mistake, Lance. You'll never fit in with those guys, and they're never gonna accept you.
It's that idea that even among a group of outcasts, he is always going to be a bigger outcast because he's not a goody two-shoes hero, he's not perfect. I think the show often hints at the fact that Lance did not have a great home life even before joining the Brotherhood. It's never something the show goes into or overtly shows, but I very much do think it's implied. And while I don't think that gives an excuse for any of the ways he has acted or will act in future, it does help to give context, which I believe is important. So it's not surprising to me that he is struggling to adapt, and things only get worse when different pieces of equipment at the X-Mansion start coming back damaged, whether it's Scott's car or the X-Van. They begin to blame Lance, when in fact it was actually the new group of younger mutants who have been taking these joyrides, title of the episode by the way, in these different vehicles the X-Men have because they think it'll be fun. And it only gets worse when these kids, very, very smart by the way, I mean, Bobby is just a genius, decide that they've had enough practice with the X-Men flight simulator they were using earlier in the episode and are ready to fly the X-Jet themselves. Now this time the kids invited Lance to go along because they're like, you know what, you're gonna get blamed for it anyways, so let's just do it. But thankfully Lance, he says no because it's stupid and dangerous, shout out Uncle Ben, but B, because he doesn't want to get kicked out of the X-Mansion, but then he realizes they're taking the X-Jet, which means they're probably going to get themselves hurt. So he takes Kitty to go after them to try and stop them. That doesn't work because they're already taking off, so Kitty and Lance both jump into the X-Jet to try and convince them to land and to not take off, but that doesn't exactly work all too well. The kids are having a fun joyride, and I think in one of the funniest reality checks that could possibly happen here was the fact that they run into the United States Air Force because, you know, they would be monitoring air traffic. Speaking of which, I don't even know if the kids know how to use the instruments to find other planes. Again, this is just wildly stupid and dangerous. Now, thankfully, Lance and Kitty are able to get away from the United States military, not get blown up, and are thankfully safe in getting home. But ultimately, when they do land, the blame is immediately put on Lance, and before Kitty even has the option to try and defend him, for whatever reason that I'm guessing is pride and a want to protect the other students, I believe, Lance ultimately tries to take the heat for it.
Yeah, I did it. So, I knew it.
No, he didn't. We did. Lance was only trying to stop us. We took the X-Van too.
Well, he tried to anyways. Thankfully, Bobby and the rest of the people that stole the X-Jet all come clean and ultimately end up in a lot of punishment. They even took Logan's bike for the record, which is kind of nuts, but that's besides the point of what I'm trying to talk about. With the fact that Lance has been blamed multiple times repeatedly for things that he hasn't done, has been treated horribly by Scott and a lot of the other senior members of the team, And I think rightfully so, Lance is fed up in this moment and ultimately decides to leave. But I do actually think it's this episode that finally culminates in him and Kitty getting together, regardless of what side of the aisle Lance is fighting for. Simply because I think at heart, Kitty comes to realize that he's a pretty decent guy. And Lance, they try a lot and really hard, not only after this episode, but during this episode, to present him as far better than he was previously presented. And they're actively trying to redeem the character, or at least get close to doing so. After this episode, I actually felt like there was a lot of potential for the two characters going forward, and I'm glad that they continued rolling the ball throughout the rest of this season, as we see multiple instances of Kitty and Lance getting together to do activities and have that typical high school, not necessarily new relationship vibe, because they never officially date, but I like you, you like me, we're just not saying what it is. It's a situationship. Why am I dancing around? It's a situationship. I mean, Kitty even asks him to go to the dance with her in one of the episodes, and it surprisingly works out really well.
Lance, would you go to the dance with me?
I'll have to think about it.
Oh, okay. I understand. Let me know.
Hey, Kitty, I thought about it, and the answer is yes.
And they definitely continue to play into the idea that Lance is getting shit from his friends and, I guess, family in the Brotherhood, really. That he's going to the dance with an X-Men and that he's fraternizing with the enemy or whatever. But then again, X-Men and Brotherhood have always been like on and off again teammates, especially in this show when the big end of season events happen. They also kind of go out of their way, especially with these future episodes, to tone down just how overtly angry and violent Lance is. And I do believe this was a way of them showing growth, especially after he spent time with the X-Men. He seems to be not only in better control of his powers, but better in control of his emotions as well, despite a lot of unfair things continuing to happen to him, like his dance being interrupted by Kurt and his teleporting shenanigans. It's even to the point that when the Brotherhood and the X-Men have to fight each other on a weekly basis, like always, Kitty is very much warned by Lance that she needs to just like jet, because unfortunately they now have Wanda, which is a whole nother subplot that happens throughout the second season. This show goes out of its way to set up really a lot of stuff that ended up being pretty cool. And this was still when Wanda was a mutant back in the day, so shout out that, I guess. Anyways, Lance tries to get Kitty to leave, and that just doesn't come to fruition because she's an X-Men, obviously. And the X-Men lose the fight, ironically enough. Shout out Wanda. They really are sore losers in this show, which is funny. But either way, this is really the last bit of Kitty Lance that we get in any sort of worthwhile mention for the second season. I really hope that you didn't get invested into this romance or this relationship between the two characters, because after that episode, that's kind of just it. You see, when season 3 rolls around, it's really playing off of season 2, which is all of mutants get revealed and they have to go on the run because the government wants them and yada yada yada. And even when they return to status quo of going to high school but their identities are revealed, we don't get much more Kitty and Lance content. And I think part of that is due to the fact that season 2, for example, got like 18 episodes, whereas season 1 had 13. Season 2 has like 17, 18. Season 3 has close to that 12 number, and then season 4 has like 9 episodes. And there's a lot they wanted to get done with this show. They wanted to have Age of Apocalypse happen, much like in the 90s show. They wanted to have these large overarching stories. They wanted to have things like S.H.I.E.L.D. in the show. They wanted to create their own characters like X-23. And ultimately something had to give. And while Lance never disappears, Kitty never disappears, the relationship between the two of them is dropped as a plot. It's occasionally hinted at, but for the most part, it stops being important. And I guess that makes sense because the relationship between Kitty and Lance was made up for this show specifically. It doesn't have roots anywhere else. Nobody in their right mind is going to drop the Jean and Scott romance. They kind of dropped the Kurt and Amanda romance as well, so it's not the only one that got dropped off. You're not going to ignore the Rogue and Gambit romance. That one is a classic. So something had to give. and it ended up being Lance and Kitty's romance. Again, hinted at, but never going on dates anymore, not really seen together in public. It stopped being important. Now look, I'll be the first to say this romance has more red flags than a goddamn San Francisco 49ers game. But at the same time, like, it fulfills that dark romance, bad boy, good girl kind of vibe. It's not the most problematic thing you could possibly talk about. It's also not the worst thing. As a matter of fact, I was not a huge fan of this couple pairing during that first season, but they really did a great job of getting me invested in the two characters and their relationship from episode 9 of season 2 onwards. They did a really good job of presenting it in a far better light and making me feel like Lance was actually making moves to change more as a character. Kitty, on the other hand, kind of stays stagnant throughout this entire show. She's just kind of always Kitty. So it was much more focused on Lance's development, which happens to be one of the pitfalls of this trope, which is that the guy really always progresses, but the girl is almost always stagnant. Doesn't mean stagnant characters are bad. I love Kitty in this show. It just means a lot more of the development time, especially on the relationship end, ended up being focused on Lance's side of things. They just do a really good job at playing up the I can fix him vibe. And as somebody who romanced Minthara more times than I can count in Baldur's Gate 3, I can rock with it. Is it perfect? No. It's definitely got its toxic elements, but at least they attempted to make it into something worth watching and something that was pretty entertaining. And ultimately, I'm really upset that they decided to drop it. I can't find a discernible reason for why they dropped the plot online, so I can only speculate. And my best guess is less episodes, less budget, more time constraints. They wanted to tell different kinds of stories, and ultimately the scope of the show outgrew that relationship, especially because it was made just for the show. I feel like the same thing happened to Spike, kind of. And honestly, I didn't remember this relationship very much from, watching this show growing up, and now I understand why, because it kind of gets dropped. So it had me wondering, like, the whole time, why this was genuinely the most requested video in the history of my channel, by far. I couldn't go 2 videos without getting a when's the Kitty and Lance video coming out. And honestly, I don't know why it took me so long. I think at one point I felt like I didn't have enough to say on the topic, and then eventually I just kind of stopped covering Evo entirely. Just nothing out of maliciousness. It's just kind of, I forgot, which is ironic to say, like, I forgot to talk about a show that I love, but other things drug my attention, and I can only make so many videos while I'm still in college. I mean, this video is coming out like a week and a half late from when I wanted it to, so if that doesn't tell you already that this semester is trying to drown me. Point being, I didn't get the hype behind this romance or this relationship, and now that I've actually taken the time to watch it through, I do get the hype, and I'm also kind of frustrated that they just abandoned it. So this goes out to all of you that have been asking me over the last over a year about a Kitty x Lance video, and I'm so sorry that it took me so long. Thank you all so much for watching. If you want to support the video, like and subscribe as I said earlier. Leave a comment if you thought anything was cool or you want to leave some constructive criticism. And as well, if you want to support me as a creator, I do have a Patreon for $1 a month. You can support these videos, see them a little early, see them without all the changes I have to make for YouTube. The link is in the description, and it would just be truly appreciated. But don't feel pressured, as your viewership is more than enough. Thank you all so much for watching. Have an absolutely fantastic day.